A live action Legend of Zelda movie is in the works. What's interesting is it's heavily involved by Nintendo, which is a good thing. As long as Nintendo is heavily involved in any future movies, whether it's the Super Mario Brothers movie that came out a few months ago, or this live action Legend of Zelda, or any other Nintendo IPs, I feel like we're hopefully going to get a decent movie, and maybe even more than decent. It's being co-financed by Sony, which is quite interesting because Sony owns the PlayStation, which is a rival gaming console to Nintendo. So Sony and Nintendo are teaming up to bring us a live-action movie from one of Nintendo's most popular IP franchises of all time, up there with Super Mario Brothers. The director that is attached currently to the live-action Legend of Zelda movie is Wes Ball. He directed the Maze Runner films, and his most recent movie coming out soon is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Looks promising. It's supposed to be a continuation of the story of the characters and the plot from the previous movies, Rise, Dawn, War for the Planet of the Apes, and I enjoyed all three of those movies. They all harken back to the original Planet of the Apes movie. So I feel like Wes Ball has potential to bring a live-action Zelda movie to the big screen in an amazing way. So here's hoping Wes Ball is the right director for Legend of Zelda. The writer that's currently attached to the movie, on the other hand, I'm kind of on the fence about. Derek Connolly. He was credited to the screenplay for Jurassic World, writing Fallen Kingdom, and the story for Jurassic World Dominion. The Jurassic World trilogy is partially due to his writing. And yeah, I like the first Jurassic World movie. It's probably my favorite Jurassic Park sequel, even though it's nowhere near as good as the original Jurassic Park. But Fallen Kingdom Dominion, not so good. He also has a screenplay for Kong Skull Island. I heard mixed reviews about Kong Skull Island. Detective Pikachu, he wrote the screenplay for that. And Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. The final movie I want to mention that might restore my faith in Derek Connolly a little bit is the fact that he was involved in the rough draft of Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. Not the final product, what was originally known as Duel of the Fates, which was supposed to be written by him along with Colin Trevorrow, who was originally going to direct Episode 9 of Star Wars Duel of the Fates. It got scrapped in favor of Rise of Skywalker, directed by J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio. Now, maybe he gets some credit because there were things that he brought up in the writer's room for Duel of Fates that got ported over to Rise of Skywalker, but I don't think that Derek Connolly should get the full blame for Rise of Skywalker. But then again, Colin Trevorrow was involved in Jurassic World and Jurassic World Dominion. Even though I like Jurassic World Dominion, not so much. But hopefully this is an opportunity for Derek Connolly to redeem himself as a writer, as long as Nintendo is heavily involved and Derek Connolly does proper research regarding The Legend of Zelda, the entire franchise. The producers, I know a lot of people don't mention the producers as much, but they have some credit. Several of the Spider-Men under Sony, like Spider-Man films, Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home, along with both Spider-Verse films, Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse, and most likely Beyond the Spider-Verse as well whenever that comes out. So, not bad when it comes to the producers. And this is being co-financed by Sony, once again with Nintendo heavily involved. Allegedly, this project has been in the works for quote-unquote many years, but development on it has only just begun. So that's mostly what we do know regarding this live-action Zelda movie. Now, what I want to talk about is my ideas and what I would do if I was in charge of a live-action Zelda movie. like that's ever going to happen. But I happen to be a huge Legend of Zelda fan. I've been playing since the original back in the 80s when I was just a kid. Now, granted, I haven't played all the Legend of Zelda games, but a lot of the big ones I have. So let's talk about what I would do. First and foremost, I would make sure that Wes Ball and Derek Conley were very respectful of the lore, the characters, and the story of Legend of Zelda when it comes to this movie. And for the record, I don't think it should be one movie. I think that the world of Legend of Zelda, the background, the characters, the lore, it's too big for one movie, even if that movie's, say, 2.5 hours. I just feel like it could be done, but I think it would be better served as two movies or perhaps even a trilogy similar to Lord of the Rings. And I'm going to cite Lord of the Rings probably a few times, or at least know that in the back of my mind, that is the example that I'm going to hold my Legend of Zelda trilogy up to by Peter Jackson. The fact that him and his team were very respectful of the lore in the books regarding Lord of the Rings when they made those movies. And another thing that they did right that I would like to see done with any movies involved with Legend of Zelda, if it's planned to be more than one movie, if it's going to be a trilogy, then I think they need to be shot back to back. I think they should take the gamble, Sony and Nintendo, and know that Legend of Zelda has a huge fan base that spans several generations. And if these movies are done right, they will be successful at the box office, just like the Lord of the Rings trilogy was. So yes, it would be more than one movie, 2 or 3, and the script would be written and put together for all the movies, and it would be filmed literally back to back. And that's the way they should do it. And then release it like annually, like one movie a year. The first movie 1 year, the second movie the following year, and then the third and final movie in the trilogy the third year. Believe me, I think that if they did it that way, with the same director, with Wes Ball directing all 3 movies, and the same writers involved, like Derek Conley, and once again, it being financed by Sony and Nintendo and heavily backed by Nintendo, I think that this would be an amazing trilogy. So when it comes to the characters, the acting, I want up-and-coming actors that show talent and promise, potential to play Link and Zelda. I do not want big-name celebrities that are already established to play Link and Zelda. I think that these two characters are young, and their characters, the actors that portray Link and Zelda, should also be young. And you should feel like that this is the proper representation of Link and Zelda on the big screen. So Link doesn't have to be mute. I know some people debate this topic. I think there was an IGN poll. By the way, IGN article link below in the description section. This is where a lot of the information I got regarding the story of the Legend of Zelda movie and production is coming from. So I just want to give credit where credit is due. But there's a poll, and I think half of the poll says Link should be mute, and the other half says Link should not be mute. I'm of the opinion that Link is not mute. It's just that we don't hear him talk in the games. If you interact with any of the characters in, for example, Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, you know that Link actually does talk to them. And if you read Zelda's journals, he does talk. It's just that Link is a man of few words. He doesn't talk all the time, but he does talk. And I think that's the way it can work for Link. He talks when he needs to talk, but for the most part, he's a man of action. So he does communicate, in my opinion. I think it's okay for the actor, as long as they look the part of Link and they're capable of wielding a sword and they're trained to do, like stunts and, hand-to-hand combat, because Link obviously uses melee weapons like a sword, shield, bow and arrow. I would like for the actor to be trained to use those. At least it's believable enough on the big screen that the actor wielding a sword and shield as Link seems to be somewhat competent. But regarding the character Link, he needs to be a hero. Badass, courageous, brave, loyal, and not a joke. I'm so sick and tired of the male protagonists in a lot of these movies that are inspired by video games or comics or books lately just being taken as a big fat joke. Well, they have some positive traits, but they're just made fun of. They're the butt of the joke and everything. I don't think Link's a joke. I mean, yeah, there are funny moments in the Zelda games, but there's also a darker tone to the Zelda franchise. Now, the same thing needs to be for Princess Zelda. I want an actress cast that properly portrays Princess Zelda, that's just as believable live action as the actor is for Link. And I want Zelda to come across similar to the Zelda of the video games. I want her to be smart, wise for her age, beautiful, compassionate, likable, leadership quality, not belittling, talking down to, or shitting on Link at every chance she gets. Now, at the beginning of their, I guess, relationship, there could be some trust issues there between Princess Zelda and Link, but I want it quickly established that he's more than ready and willing to prove himself worthy of being Princess Zelda's swordsman. And when it comes to the actors who are ultimately hired to play Link and Zelda, once again, I want them to be around the same age, younger, say early 20s, and I want them to properly portray Link and Zelda on screen to be believable. But I also want the actor and the actress playing Link and Zelda to have chemistry. Now, the third main character in the game, along with Link, Princess Zelda, is Ganondorf. They need to get Ganondorf right as well and hire a really good actor to properly portray Ganondorf on the big screen. He needs to be an actual villain. He needs to be cunning, clever, smooth-talking, powerful, ambitious, treacherous, as well as obsessed with doing whatever it takes to ultimately conquer Hyrule. A character that the audience will love to hate. And there's also going to be supporting characters as well, but the three main characters, once again, Link, Zelda, Ganondorf. One of the supporting characters I think that's going to be necessary is King Rome. I also want a really good actor, maybe a seasoned older male actor that could come across as a very convincing King Rome. So those are four very important characters along with the other supporting characters that I will mention. So the overall premise of the movie revolves around the plot of Ganondorf to seize control of Hyrule, despite the fact that at the beginning of the film, and perhaps throughout maybe 2/3 of the first movie, the main characters have no idea that Ganondorf is behind the plot, because Ganondorf sits on the King's Council along with other representatives from the other species that make up Hyrule, the Hylians, along with the Ritu, the birds that are flying up in the sky, the Zora, along with the Gorons, and the Gerudo out from the desert, which are predominantly female, except for one male every 100 years. And it just so happens that the one male Gerudo is Ganondorf, their chieftain. The Legend of Zelda movie exists in its own timeline, universe, not directly connected to the video games, but obviously heavily inspired by the games like the original Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, perhaps even some inspiration from the Age of Calamity, which isn't really technically a Legend of Zelda game, but I do like the backstory of Link in that game, where he starts off as a soldier in the king's army, and he ultimately proves worthy to King Rome to become Princess Zelda's swordsman and loyal bodyguard. So I do like that aspect from the Age of Calamity. You know, a few other things here and there as well that you could cherry pick from other previous Zelda games. King Rome rules Hyrule along with, his generations of the royal family. The heir to Hyrule is his daughter, Princess Zelda. Her mother passed away some time ago. And in the Kingdom of Hyrule, you have the capital, which is Hyrule Castle. And within the castle, not only do you have King Rome and the King's Council and Princess Zelda, but also guarded by the royal family and the knights of Hyrule and the royal guard and all of them, is the most important artifacts and relics of the Kingdom of Hyrule, which is the Triforce. And there's obviously three pieces of the Triforce: the Triforce of Power, the Triforce of Wisdom, and the Triforce of Courage. And obviously they are a very important symbol to not only the King of Hyrule, Princess Zelda, along with the Kingdom of Hyrule itself, but throughout the ages and the history of Hyrule, there's always been the Triforce. The movie basically would open with the Kingdom of Hyrule being attacked by monsters and members of the Yiga clan. And they're basically attacking different parts of Hyrule, different towns and villages. And nobody knows what's behind the monster attacks besides allegedly the Yiga clan, which were once part of the Sheikah, but they split off some time ago. King Rome is not able to determine who or what is behind all these monster attacks, but he's determined to get down to the bottom of it, and he is kind of suspicious of a few people, one of them obviously being Ganondorf, but he doesn't reveal his suspicions to Ganondorf because, well, Ganondorf happens to be part of his King's Council. There's obviously upcry throughout the Kingdom of Hyrule from all four corners because a lot of innocent people are being attacked. The Hylians, the Rito, the Zora, the Gerudo, the Gorons, and they demand answers. They demand action. They want the monster problem dealt with. And obviously King Rome wants to restore peace to his kingdom. So he decides to dispatch his own daughter, Princess Zelda, to lead a company of champions, our heroes, from across Hyrule in order to investigate and determine who or what is behind the monster attacks and why. Early in the movie, there's a monster attack, and there's like a group of soldiers fighting the monsters, and several of the soldiers are being cut down or retreating. But there's one young soldier who is managing to, almost on his own, turn the tide and rally other soldiers behind him in order to drive back the monsters from a village. And that young soldier happens to be Link. Word gets back to King Rome of young Link's heroics, and King Rome summons the young soldier, who kneels before King Rome in the inner sanctum of Hyrule Castle with Princess Zelda standing beside King Rome. And King Rome pulls out the Master Sword, which he wields, along with the Hylian shield, and he dubs Link a knight and charges him with being Zelda's swordsman and protector and loyal bodyguard on the mission that Zelda is about to undertake. Bear in mind, at this point in the movie, Link does not have the Master Sword or the Hylian shield. He's still a capable warrior. It is currently King Rome that possesses the Hylian shield and the Master Sword. Princess Zelda then assembles her company of champions, along with Link, her best friend, Princess Mipha from the Zora, along with another acquaintance of hers, Pura, who is a Sheikah scientist. I know she's not a champion, but by the end of Tears of the Kingdom, she might as well be one of the heroes in Champions. So I'm going to count Pura as a champion hero as well. Rivali, which is, obviously a very cocky warrior from the Rito. He joins the champions along with Duraka, Goron, and Urbosa, who is a Gerudo. She is assigned to the champions by Ganondorf. The enemy factions at the moment are just a whole bunch of different monsters. And eventually you find out that the Yiga clan is also involved in the plot to some degree, but I think the Yiga clan would be an interesting antagonistic faction in these movies. And when it comes to the monsters, obviously the well-known popular monsters from the Legend of Zelda games, specifically how they look in Breath of the Wild as well as Tears of the Kingdom. I feel like the monsters are done pretty well in these games. And like I mentioned, the Yiga are there, and you see some, I guess, rivalry between the Yiga and Sheikah. Now, when it comes to Urbosa, she becomes kind of like a big sister, mentor to a younger Princess Zelda, very similar to how she's portrayed in Breath of the Wild as well as Age of Calamity. So I do like that. Now, she is unaware of Ganondorf's plot, but she's also seen by Ganondorf as kind of a rival of his, because she's well respected among the Gerudo, even though Ganondorf happens to be the head, the chief of the Gerudo, because he is obviously the only male. But Urbosa has no idea what Ganondorf is actually up to. But while on the King's Council, Ganondorf is trying to convince King Rhoam that all sorts of other factions and groups are behind the monsters. One of the main faction that Ganondorf likes to blame for the monsters is the Sheikah, because they're kind of mysterious, and they're about magic, but they also are about science, just like with Pura and a few others. So he has to try and blame somebody for the monsters. So he's constantly telling Rhoam, oh, the Sheikah must be behind this. You really shouldn't allow Pura to be part of the champions, because she's nothing more than a Sheikah spy. But despite Ganondorf's best efforts to persuade King Rhoam that the Sheikah are behind the monsters, he still has his doubts about Ganondorf himself. But King Rhoam is no idiot, and he's keeping his opinions to himself and a few others. But eventually the mask does come off, and once Ganondorf has his pieces in place and monsters assembled close enough to Hyrule Castle, along with the Yiga clan. There's also an extremely loyal, extremist Gerudo female warrior faction who are in league with Ganondorf. They know what Ganondorf is up to, but they're obviously loyal to him, and they will follow him till the bitter end. But not all the Gerudo are aware of Ganondorf's true ambitions and plans. It's just that they're loyal to him because he happens to be their chieftain, just like with Urbosa, until the plot is unraveled and the revelation that he is behind the attacks and the monsters and the Yiga clan. But when the time is right, Ganondorf does reveal himself and launch his attack on Hyrule Castle. Basically a siege. Zelda, Link, and the champions find out when it's almost too late, so they're rushing back to Hyrule Castle in order to save King Rhoam, as well as rescue all three pieces of the Triforce before Ganondorf can take the king, along with, once again, the Triforce of Power, Courage, and Wisdom. Despite the fact that Hyrule Castle is obviously surrounded by Ganondorf's forces, the champions are able to sneak through tunnels underneath Hyrule Castle that only Zelda know about, because it happens to be one of those many secrets that the Hyrule royal family has. But by the time they brave their way through the tunnels underneath Hyrule Castle, the gates of Hyrule Castle have already been breached by Ganondorf's forces. Yiga clans have already snuck into the castle, so there's fighting between monsters and soldiers of Hyrule, the Royal Guard, the Knights, being led by King Rhoam, who's wielding the Master Sword and the Hylian Shield. Ganondorf manages to get his hands on the Triforce of Power, but the champions manage to retrieve the Triforce of Courage and Wisdom, so Ganondorf isn't able to get all three pieces of the Triforce. King Rhoam orders Zelda, Link, and the rest of the champions to flee with the other two pieces of the Triforce, as him and what's left of his men try to hold off Ganondorf. And there's obviously an epic fight between Ganondorf and his loyal Gerudo female warriors and what remains of the King's Guard. Ultimately, it comes down to a 1v1 versus King Rome and Ganondorf, Rome wielding the Master Sword and the Hylian Shield, even though he is a capable warrior of his own. His best days are behind him. He's past his prime. He's obviously older, and ultimately no match to Ganondorf. I mean, he puts up a good fight against Ganondorf, but he does get struck down and mortally wounded by Ganondorf in the fight and drops the Master Sword. Princess Zelda cannot stand the idea of her father being left behind to be captured or killed by Ganondorf, and so Link rushes back to the main chamber of Hyrule Castle where the fight's been taking place. Fighting his way through a few monsters, he ends up breaking the sword that he was using. Meanwhile, Ganondorf is obviously monologuing over his defeated former king, talking about how the royal line of Hyrule will end with King Rome and his daughter, and that he will retrieve the last two pieces of the Triforce, and he will rule Hyrule forever, and that there's nothing that Zelda or her so-called champions can do to stop him. Just as Ganondorf is about to lay the killing blow upon King Rome, Ganondorf's weapon is blocked by the Master Sword, which is now wielded by Link, to both Ganondorf and King Rome's surprise, which helps buy Zelda and the remaining champions time to rescue a mortally wounded King Rome. Link manages to escape. He has the Hylian Shield, the Master Sword in hand. The rest of the champions escape too, along with the mortally wounded King Rome, and two of the three other Triforces, the Triforce of Wisdom and the Triforce of Courage. However, the movie ends with Ganondorf basically winning. His forces have seized control of Hyrule Castle. He sits on the throne. He has the Triforce of Power. Meanwhile, the champions, Zelda, Link, and mortally wounded King Rome, manage to flee to the Lost Woods, where Rome is dying, and he has final moments with both Princess Zelda as well as Link. He has a heartfelt moment with Zelda, not king to princess, but father to daughter, telling her how proud he's always been of her, as well as how proud Zelda's mother would be of her too, and how Zelda is worthy of being his heir and eventually rightfully ruling Hyrule. Link offers to hand the Master Sword back to a dying King Rome, but King Rome laughs and tells Link that no, I did not choose to wield the Master Sword. The Master Sword chose me, just as it has chosen you. So obviously there's a bit of backstory there when Rome was a young prince and he came upon the Master Sword. But once again, it's the Master Sword that chose its wielder, not the other way around. So by the end of the movie, Link has earned the right to wield the Master Sword along with the Hylian Shield. With his dying breath, King Rome charges Princess Zelda, Link, and the rest of the champions with protecting the two remaining Triforce pieces, the Triforce of Courage, the Triforce of Wisdom, save Hyrule, and destroy Ganondorf once and for all. That's how the first movie would end if I was in charge, more or less. It's just, I guess you could say, a rough draft, if you will, that needs to be fleshed out a bit more. But once again, I feel like this movie deserves to be more than just one film. It should be a trilogy, and it should be handled and respected the exact same way that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was by Peter Jackson. All three films written and filmed side by side, back to back. Obviously, it would have the Legend of Zelda theme to it, because you can't have this movie without the iconic Legend of Zelda theme, along with an amazing score throughout the movie. So I'd definitely hire a really good composer and orchestra for the score of Legend of Zelda. The movie obviously needs to be action-packed with practical special effects, and if need be at cases, especially with the monsters, CGI for the monsters, but mostly try to keep it like practical and special effects. The backdrop of Hyrule, I would like for it to be filmed in real locations throughout the world, similar to how they did Lord of the Rings. Most of Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand, but there's definitely plenty of beautiful parts of the world which could serve as different locations for Hyrule. I also want real sets along with, outfits, clothing that are heavily inspired by the Legend of Zelda video games. Now, I don't expect it to be like 100% facsimile for Link and Zelda and Ganondorf, but I would like to see the live action film and feel how faithful and how much love and attention to detail and care the director, the writers put in to a live action Legend of Zelda movie or a trilogy. So I definitely want it to feel like I'm in Hyrule. As a Legend of Zelda fan, I just want these movies to be faithful to the franchise. It doesn't have to be 100% off the franchise. There can be some creative liberties taken, but there are also some things that should never be changed or sacrificed when it comes to the story of Legend of Zelda. Like the characters, Link should feel like Link, Princess Zelda should feel like Zelda, Ganondorf should feel like Ganondorf, and I don't think that there's need for a quote-unquote message, which has been in a lot of movies and franchises in recent years. Most of the time, it just feels like that message is being hit over the head over and over again. We just need good stories and great characters that feel worthy of the Legend of Zelda franchise when it comes to this movie or series of movies that are being planned by Nintendo and Sony. Your thoughts, views, and opinions when it comes to a Legend of Zelda live action movie or franchise, welcome, as always, below in the comments section.